Good afternoon, Luke.
Hello, Luke.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading your piece today. You've focused on something he talked about, the Saudi tax that maybe before he got into the job he didn't think existed, but certainly in this window he has seen it. He has seen it in action because everybody thinks you've got absolute fortunes to spend on players.
Yeah, that was certainly one of the leap out sort of strands. There were a lot of them, actually. It was an hour and a half, the interview, which is, in my sort of long journalistic career, is quite unusual for a sporting director or indeed anybody to sit there for an hour and a half with reporters. But yeah, he talks about the Saudi tax. And I think that has been an issue ever since the takeover happened. I think if you remember those heady days of October, November 2021, when they were going to be signing Mbappe and Messi and Ronaldo and all the world's biggest stars, there's been this kind of misconception that Newcastle, yes, they do have the world's richest owners in Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, but because of PSR, the dreaded PSR that we're all sick of talking about, but we have to these days, they are unable to spend that money. But I think it's taken a while for clubs to kind of catch on. Now, what I will say about Mitchell saying this, I think it is genuine. I think a lot of what you said on that subject was good. I don't think that excuses spending a month trying to sign Marc Guehi and then failing and not having any alternative any targets or bids in for players. So I think it's important they probably did draw that line in the sand. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward in January and next summer. But again, I don't really think any of what he said yesterday particularly let him off the hook with the Marc Guehi transfer.
I mean, Steve Parry said it on this station, there was a price that they would have been interested at, and I'm sure Newcastle knew what it was, which makes you wonder about these little increments of 5 million that didn't quite cut it. It was conducted publicly, and he said, I'm not going to just sign players for my ego, but it wasn't a good look, was it really?
No, it wasn't a good look. And I liked all that stuff he said about not signing a player for his ego. I think that was very sensible. I liked what he said about, he can't be judged on his first window, that he has to be judged on sort of 3, 4, 5 windows. These are all very, very sensible stuff. But again, it goes back to, as you say, it was a month-long pursuit and a very public pursuit. To only withdraw from that pursuit with 48 hours, less than 48 hours of the window to go, and then put in a rather farcical last day bid for Anthony Elanga at Nottingham Forest as well. I think the window was a mess, and I applaud Paul Mitchell for coming out and talking about it, but I noticed he didn't want to take any responsibility for it whatsoever. And I have had various conversations with people today. It was almost like he was playing his get out of jail free card, really, for me, in that not me, Gov. I didn't have anything to do with this window. I was only the sporting director who was leading all the negotiations, and he's 90% in charge of recruitment. But what he was saying was, it all happened. I came in too late. All the targets were already decided. All I did was try and make the deals happen. Bottom line, you didn't make the deals happen, and the targets you had didn't move to Newcastle, which leaves them, leaves Eddie Howe with one hand tied behind his back for the season ahead.
Would it be fair to say they had a bit of a pop at the previous regime? I've seen the term that the department inherited in aspects was not fit for purpose. He seems to be suggesting, he said you can't just buy loads of players at peak age and peak price. I think he'd like to see maybe more data-driven, maybe a bit more intelligent recruiting. So was that a bit of a pop at Dan Ashworth, you think?
I think it was a little bit of a pop at Dan Ashworth, and I agreed. Again, I'm going to caveat it. I agreed with some of what he said. I think Newcastle can be smarter in terms of scouring the global market. Look at the sort of work that Brighton have done in identifying young talent around the world and signing them at lower prices. But everybody's trying to do that. Yes, I think they can improve their data-driven recruitment processes. A lot of clubs are trying to do that, aren't they? Brentford, Liverpool famously have really sort of mastered that system. All of these things have been improving. I think their scouting network needs to improve. I think it can be deeper, it can be wider. But again, to use an analogy, it's a bit like politics, isn't it? When a new government, we're seeing it with the Labour government at the moment, come into power, when they make a mess of something or when things are bad, what happens is you blame the previous administration and say you inherited a mess. Again, Paul Mitchell can get away with that this time because it's his first window. He can say all these things now. But if football managers are judged on results, I think that's fair. sporting directors are ultimately judged on the signings that they bring in. And he had a bad first window. 7 weeks or not, he had a bad first window. So he fronted up yesterday. He put a lot of context around why that happened. But you can't keep getting away with, you get out of jail free card and blaming the previous administration for the fact you didn't sign players.
Briefly, look, just away from this, I just wondered if you recall what the situation was around Newcastle when they returned to the Champions League. And their ticket price, there's been a lot of fallout from what Villa have done. What was the feeling around where Newcastle set the tariff when they came back recently?
I don't think they did the massive hike. Certainly didn't do the massive hike that Aston Villa have. I think a lot has gone right at Aston Villa, hasn't it, under their owners. This feels like a misstep. It feels like a mistake. It feels a little bit like exploitation, really, of their supporters and their desperation to see them in the Champions League. We've seen it with Oasis tickets. Slightly tangent there, but we've seen this dynamic pricing. But it's similar to that, isn't it? Villa know they can sell their home ground out capacity probably 2-3 times. So they're bumping up the prices and exploiting fans' really desperation to see that. Newcastle didn't do that. I'm sure the tickets were in the higher price bracket, but they didn't create a whole new price bracket for these games. So I'm disappointed in Aston Villa, really. And I know I sort of stuck in the throat for some of their fans as well.
Good stuff, Luke. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Luke Edwards, the Telegraph's man in the North East there.
It's like when a manager says comes in and where the players aren't fit.
Yeah, that's not one. Takes away the tomato sauce. I mean, look, it was an interesting interview. Go and check. He spoke to a number of the newspapers, and there's some very interesting stuff in there. But as Luke says, he'll be judged on what he does from now on. There will be a close eye on him. On the Villa front, I mean, it's been universally condemned, and I'm sure we'll be chatting to Stan Collymore about it tomorrow. But there's been no reaction from the club. The Villa Trust have come out and said how unhappy they are. We heard from Gabby on the show, of course. But why have Villa not come back? They're obviously trying to formulate some justification for it. And the longer they leave that, it does purely feed into what everybody thinks. That it's
unless they're going to hold their hands up and go, sorry, we got it wrong, and here you go.
I mean, I think that would be very... Premier League clubs, they're not great at climbing. I mean, barring the Super League, which was a bit of an outlier, they're generally not that great at climb downs. But you kind of want some justification. I can't believe that Villa so far, as I said, maybe they're formulating it, have not put something out to explain the justification for the price.
During the international break as well, when there's sort of nothing to take eyes off it as well, it becomes big news, doesn't it? So it's...
we'll keep an eye on that.
Yes.
We'll keep refreshing the Villa page. And
I reckon
it's
quite a good sales technique. If you go, it's £90, right? And everyone goes, no one's paying on, we're not paying on. All right, it's 70. Right, okay. No, then it might have been 70 in the first place.
Been, like Rupert said, it'd been category A prices that you'd expect to pay for the big matches, the Liverpools and Uniteds, etc., cities. And maybe a bit more, a couple of quid more, but not nearly double what people pay.
No. It's pretty families.
Very poor. Anyway, we're going to be joined by the QI elves, Anna and James. They're popping in a little bit later.
And the QR codes.
And the QR codes. What a band they were. Paul
Hawksbee and Andy Jacobs, Monday to Friday afternoons 1 till 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.